Evening, everybody. Welcome to the Extraordinary Planning and Transportation Working Group meeting. Right. If anyone's got an electronic device, mute it, please, to avoid feedback. Don't think we've got any remote participants, so that skips over that one. The meeting's going to be recorded, and data collected in the recording will be retained according to the Council's data retention policy and may be added to the Council's website. Okay. So welcome to the meeting, and following staff are in attendance. We've got Joanne Johnson, Head of Place, Stuart Watson, Project Manager, and Philippa Davis for Democratic Services. Emergency evacuation procedure is as normal. Please leave the building, don't use the lifts, don't come back. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Charles Gibson, who is substituted by Councillor Ben Martin, from Councillor Kieran Golding, who is substituted by Councillor Anne Kavanagh, from Councillor Mike Whiting, and from Councillor Elliot Jays, who is substituted by Councillor Peter MacDonald. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Good. Okay, so we're going on to the item for tonight, which is the Housing Targets Exceptional Circumstances Study. And Stuart, if you could perhaps introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, to inform the local plan review, consultants ACON were commissioned in April of this year to determine whether there may be an exceptional circumstance for a lower housing target for Swale. This followed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework (NPPF) in December 2023, which stated nationally set housing targets were advisory rather than mandatory and could be departed from where there were exceptional circumstances that could be evidenced. The study before you addresses two distinct elements to help inform whether or not there is a case for a lower housing target. The first is known as housing need, and that looks at whether there's an exceptional circumstance that exists to justify calculating the need using a different methodology rather than the government's standard method. And the second, what is known as housing requirement, looks at whether there are wider factors, essentially constraints, unmet needs and supply issues, that exist to justify adopting a housing requirement below the local housing need. This study also incorporates the implications of the proposed changes to the NPPF as set out in the government's July 2024 consultation. The changes include removal of the exceptional circumstances from the approach to calculating housing need and moving back to mandatory targets. If this is adopted into policy, this means that planning for a lower figure will need to be only carried through where a local authority can demonstrate that there are hard constraints in their area and that all other options have been exhausted. The NPPF consultation also proposes changes to the data that informs the government standard method. So it proposes to move away from existing projections of dwelling growth to an existing housing stock approach, and it has also proposing to adjust the affordability uplift element of it. So in terms of the actual exceptional circumstances study, it has two main recommendations: that the local plan making should be undertaken with a focus on setting the housing requirement according to the government standard method of local housing need, but that the council should remain open to setting the housing requirement at a lower or higher figure. In terms of that housing requirement, the study recommends that options will need to be refined and a final decision also need to be made in light of detailed evidence of the council's proposed strategy and supply options. The study also goes on to identify a significant discrepancy of 3,000 dwellings between the net additional homes recorded by the council's own monitoring and the dwelling stock growth according to the Census 2021. Since the study was completed, an independent research paper has actually taken a closer look at discrepancies across Kent and has identified that the vast majority for Swale comes from the addition of caravan or other mobile or temporary structures that had been previously omitted from census data. Further, the paper goes on to identify that many of those structures were unoccupied at the time of the census count and so did not meet the definition of a dwelling for the purpose of the census. I think at the moment we need to take a cautionary approach to this discrepancy. We need to wait to see what the government says in its position in its response to the NPPF consultation. But based on what they say then, it may be worth at that point making a decision whether or not as a council we want to investigate the discrepancy further. Thank you, Chair. This concludes my introduction.
Thank you. Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, one thing on the discrepancy. If it's found that these extra houses should be included, for me, does that mean that our annual target would actually increase rather than decrease?
So if the government doesn't change its existing stock approach, and we have evidence that there's somewhere in the region of 2,600 dwellings that weren't occupied at the time of the census, then we could actually go and argue that our existing stock figure position should go down by 2,600. And as a result, that will inform the standard method of calculation, and that would result in a lower housing need figure. But we would have to be clear that we have the evidence, that we have been able to go back through our records and confirm those 2,600 mobile homes were not occupied at the time of the census. So it would require a bit of investigation if the government don't change its position on that.
If I can come back. Given that that is the case, then I certainly think we should be looking at considering that piece of work, because if it comes into play, we might need to be able to respond to it quite quickly, rather than getting that finding that information and then having to start proving one way or the other. So I think it would be useful to know, given the problems that we've got on the timeline. Some wider points. Having read this several times now, I don't really feel that the recommendations that the report writers put forward quite reflect the situation. Now, I have a number of points. I don't know if you want to take them one at a time, or just let me rattle through them and then go through the lot.
Perhaps it'd be best to take them one at a time.
Okay. Some of them aren't that important. Paragraph 1.2.3 regarding the Worthing local plan. Now, they ended up with a significantly lower housing requirement due to a lack of suitable supply options. Now, the key word there is suitable. And I think that's something we have to bear in mind. How many suitable options do we have coming forward? If I just take the next couple. The next one is on 4.2.3. I think it's worth noticing here, Swales growth is higher than the South East and England averages. It is I think the fourth highest growth in Kent. And we know that the way the standard housing method tends to work is those that have got higher numbers or delivered more numbers get higher numbers to deliver in the future. So I think that is something we have to bear in mind and include within reports, that we have had a considerably higher growth in housing numbers and occupancy numbers than most of Kent, especially if you compare us to Medway. Nearly twice the Medway figure, which, given the size of Medway and the size of us, seems a little out of balance. 4.217 talks about the growth in population. The growth in Swales population and housing stock is likely to have supported job growth in Medway, not us. So you look at 4414, and it shows that we are basically providing homes for people to work elsewhere. Now, that is not supposed to be the heart of sustainable development. It says if we were to build for jobs, then it would be significantly lower. I think we need to be looking at considering putting forward, as part of any argument, but we should actually be allowed to have a lower housing figure, but increase the employment area. so that we can actually start trying to get jobs for people who live locally. Everybody talks about dormitory towns, but this is just continuing that approach. And I don't think the idea is that we're supposed to have dormitory towns. I thought that the government was supposed to be moving away from that concept. So us having to provide more houses than jobs runs contrary to that. So that's my first couple of points.
Stuart, do you want to come back on any of those? On those?
Yeah, if I can come back on the supply options issue and also the out-commuting issue that Mike's just mentioned on his third point. So in terms of the Swell Council's supply options, we're developing a draft housing and economic land availability assessment, and we're currently carrying out a call for sites to further inform our site options there. When we bring those sites to members, we'll be setting out within the HELA sites that we consider that are potentially suitable and suitable. And that's based on an evidential approach. So we've had to we will be discounting sites where there's hard constraints. So for example, if they're 100% located within the national landscape or flood zone 3B, for example. But there will be sites that will be borderline where potentially the constraints could be mitigated for, and they will be known as potentially suitable sites. So that's where the decisions will need to be made, whether or not enough evidence and can be developed to make those sites suitable as we go through the drafting process. So at this stage, it's really a question in terms of the supply options to progress with the call for sites, to move the HELA to its second draft once we've completed that process, and then look at what our options are through the evidence-based approach of it. In terms of out commuting, Mike's third point, I think it's a question of good place making, so ensuring that sites are located in sustainable locations where there is access to existing jobs. But then when you go larger size sites, towards strategic scale, ensuring that there's a positive mix of uses on those sites so that there are employment opportunities there, and also making sure that where our employment allocations are, that they're closely aligned to where our housing potential housing allocations would be as well. That's the tools that we have in our box as such to try and stop this out commuting problem.
Okay,
Mike, can I? I'll come back to you later. If
it's
necessary,
directly related to that point.
Okay, all right.
I have others, but I'll come. Yeah, but we talk about trying to get people near jobs. We're looking at one allocation is another 600 in iWade. Now iWade has had hundreds of houses built and very little employment to go with it. So rather than 600 more houses in iWade, why can we not say take 600 off our target and we can use that land for employment where all that growth has been? And it just seems that we don't have an awful lot of employment sites, and a lot of it's where there's already employment. Already landowners want to put their housing forward for houses. They don't want to put it forward for positive employment sites unless they know there's no prospect of getting housing. Is there any way that we can kick back against that approach?
Our latest employment land review, which was published on our council website earlier this year, actually demonstrates that there is an increased need for employment use within the borough now, whereas the previous study said it was close to flatlining. So we do have that evidence now that we can push back. But we have to remember that when we're looking at the needs as part of plan making, we're looking at all the needs. So it's housing, employment, leisure, and so forth. So it is a balancing act. And we are somewhat constrained as well by the sites that are made available to us. So as I mentioned, this current call for sites, we try to be a lot more engaged and proactive in terms of going out to the actual, for example, we're looking at town centre sites, actual empty shop units, and trying to engage with the landowners there. So we are looking at ways to try and reach wider audiences, but we are still somewhat constrained by the sites that are submitted to us.
Thank you. Julian.
Thank you. In the officer's report at 2.2, he says there could be a case for setting a housing requirement below the local housing need on the basis of transport issues, particularly highways capacity, acting as a brake on growth in the borough if satisfactory reinforcements can't be delivered in a timely fashion. I would say it's a bit stronger than that. I'm disappointed that this report only devotes 2 pages to transport. I think it's a much more serious issue than that. The report does highlight that the major roads across the borough are linked, so the cumulative impact across all major junctions need to be considered. And National Highways have indicated the need, due to known capacity issues within the borough, for the phasing of large-scale development with the timescales for the delivery of planned junction improvements or improvements identified as being necessary. But will these improvements actually come forward? They also talk about the need to maximise the move to sustainable transport, this fictional panacea to solve all our problems at some unspecified date in the future where we're all going to be walking and cycling everywhere. On the Stockby roundabout, it acknowledges that it has capacity support the delivery of growth already planned, but further assessment will be required to determine how much, if any, of further growth can be accommodated. In other words, if we build any more houses, we'll need yet another upgrade. Junction 6, it admits there's need for additional mitigation over and above what's currently planned. Junction 7, Brenley Corner, the report acknowledges it's already operating at capacity. It regularly creates peak hour congestion, and the capacity of this junction, therefore, is not only a constraint to development locally, but also more widely across North and East Kent, particularly development in local authority areas along the M2A2 corridor, and also has a wider strategic impact on the economy of the South East as a whole. This seems to me a pretty fundamental point. And it further acknowledges there's no committed national improvement scheme to mitigate these issues. There is a pipeline scheme for a continuous M2A2 route with potential delivery beyond 2025, but there's no commitment to this scheme being included for funding and taking through to construction. And National Highways have said that these proposals cannot be relied on to mitigate the development planned in the emerging local plan. So we've got no guarantee that the Brenley Corner upgrade will actually happen. The new government are being very tight-lipped on that. And in the absence of any certainty on highways infrastructure, I don't see how we can agree to this level of housing. Thank you.
Could I just, sort of add to that? I mean, it's almost sort of summed up in 618 of the actual report. It says that policy and plan making can be used as a tool to address these challenges. But, I mean, my sort of reaction to that is, well, can it really? It does seem to be very optimistic that challenges along the lines that Councillor Peter has outlined could be met. I suppose the question sort of that goes on from that is, at what point do we is that made, or is that point made? Does it have to be right at the end of the process, or do we, at what point do we have to go through everything before we can say it's can't be done?
Okay, so as you rightly mentioned, transport can be one of the biggest constraints to enabling development within the borough. The issue is, in terms of actually identifying where the impact will occur, is that we need to basically agree the growth approaches and the preferred approach for the borough, and we also need to agree the quantum of development, so how many years the plan period will be, so whether it be for 16 years and what the level of housing target and employment target will be as a result of that. And then as the council agreed back in July time, the approach to consultation is going to take 2 stages. So it's going to have a draft Reg 18 plan consultation where we'll actually look at the growth option, look at a potential suite of sites, and alongside that we'll be running detailed transport modelling. So from there we'll actually have the evidence where there may be the constraints and what mitigations are required. And from there, we may be able to start identifying whether there is a case for a lower figure or whether there may be a case for a step trajectory approach. So we deliver a lower amount in the early years of the plan, whilst mitigations waiting to be brought forward, and then a higher amount in the later periods of the plan. So that's really why we can't get the detail at this stage, is because we need, the council needs to be clear where its growth is going to occur, what the alternative growth options are, and what the quantum of development would be. And the only way to get those answers is to move forward basically with the draft and the plan. The Reg 18 draft plan is only the first stage. It carries very limited weight in terms of planning decision making, but it enables us to go out and test with the statutory stakeholders, the infrastructure providers, a potential approach for the local plan, which we can then refine as we move forward towards a Reg 19 submission plan version.
Thank you. Through the chair, Stuart. My comment, we're not going to stop commuting. Higher wages in London. We all know people are moving down here from London to get a better quality life, but keep their wage. My question, though, was about this 2,600 possibly temporary properties. What difference would that make to our housing number that we would have to fill? Thank you.
So if we're looking at a 16-year plan period, then it'd make a difference between about 5 to 600. So it'd lower the housing target by between 5 to 600. We won't know the exact figures until we run the calculations of the standard method, but it will bring it down roughly around that number.
Just going back to Mike's, I think, second point, when he rose before, he was asking about the work that would need to be done to look at that. The study that is referenced in the report, has that already done that to some extent, or would more work need to be done?
Sorry, you're talking about transport issues.
No. Sorry, about the 2,600 unlocked caravans.
No, so the study itself didn't look into the detail of the discrepancy. At the time of writing, they weren't sure exactly where it was coming from. So there's an appendix attached to my report here, which shows an independent research paper that was carried out where the researcher actually went away and did some investigation, spoke to the government about where the discrepancy occurred. So that person's identified this discrepancy now, and he's identified there was just over 2,600 mobile structures that were unoccupied at the time. So it looks like there's good evidence there that we can bring down the figure. We would have to confirm that with our own council tax records, and we also need to really wait to see what the government's response is to the NPPF consultation and to see whether or not they adjust our figure down or not.
So there is more work to be done. Yeah. Mike, did you want to come back on that particular point?
That's right. I think we need to get that work started rather than wait for the government to the NPPF, because, putting this in the context of the other points that I haven't had a chance to make yet, but the uncertainty around so much of this delivery, the points that Councillor Speed made, I think we are woefully unprepared and not planning to prepare to get the information that we need to put in a case for a lower figure. We're talking about putting a Reg 18 and testing one option, with the other options being put to one side. If that doesn't work, we've gone out to the expense of a Reg 18 and the time that takes, and then that option doesn't work very well from a traffic scenario, we then have to look at another Reg 18 and another set of sites and see if that works. I strongly feel that to inform our decisions going forward, to give some idea of the level of mitigation that might be needed, and whether or not it's possible to get that mitigation, we should test all 6 of our scenarios to see if any come close to working. Now that means that we've got to identify potential sites for all 6 scenarios, but I can just see us going round and round and round, trying to find a pattern that works. And the Highways England, or whatever they are these days, National Highways, will tell us if it doesn't work. KCC will tell us if they have concerns, but they won't tell us what suite of seats will work. And given that we're trying to show that we don't think there is a workable way of doing this, I don't see the point in doing a different traffic model for every Reg 18 in the hope that one works. I can't see any of them working without serious mitigation. I would like to see all the options tested with potential sites to see if any of them come close to working. Now, that might be expensive, but it's going to save us a hell of a lot of time. And it might, if none of them work, that's evidence to show that the number is unsustainable. That goes towards our argument that however you dice and slice, without huge government investment or huge government money, we can't deliver. I think that's what we should be focusing on. I accept that we try and identify different suites of 11,000 and test them, because that's working with the standard number. We work with the standard number, and let's just see how big a challenge it actually is. Because if we want to argue that we want to go lower, we need that evidence, and we need it as soon as possible. So just doing an option and testing it and seeing if that works, going out to Reg 18, I can just see us not making much progress. And we can't make any real progress until the Highstead Park, Angela Rayner's decided on that one. So we're kind of in a bit of a limbo, because although it wouldn't really impact on the first 5 years of our local plan, it's going to take a significant chunk out of it. So, and of course it will have traffic impacts. What have been, I asked this at the last meeting, what has been the traffic modelling that has been done by developers on these large sites that we've got coming in? I think we need to see that. We need to see what the traffic modelling for Highstead is, what the traffic modelling for the Duchy is, for Bobbing, for this weird one out in Dunkirk. We need to see what traffic modelling's been done and get a good picture of what the different options are and if any of them work.
Noted. James, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I think this is a good report, and why it's really good is because it's just told us what we've known for 5 years. It's exactly what the inspector said at the last local plan hearing, that we've got traffic problems, that it will be a stepped approach, and that the traffic issues need addressing. And it hasn't been done. We've sat on it for 5 years, and now we're talking about things that we were talking about back then. Traffic modelling has already been done on those sites, and the details are there somewhere. They just haven't seemed to have come forward. I remember speaking at the time when James Freeman was head of planning and Jerry Lewin was cabinet member at the time, and we've had these exact same conversations at that point, and we were told that the traffic modelling each run cost £50,000. We couldn't be doing them all at the time, but there was 4 or 5 that were done, and that included things such as Highstead Park, the approach with just having the Duchy lands, the Bobbin Garden Village, and then other sites. So that information is already there somewhere, and that should already be used, even if it's slightly out of date now. So having this in the report that we've got highways issues, yet we already knew it, and I just don't know why we haven't done more up until this point on that. And I agree with Councillor Ball that it should be moved forward. It should have been done a long time ago. And until we know where we're going to go with transport, I don't see how we can be moving forward. The rest of the report, obviously it shows that we've got no other real reason to be arguing the case against something we already knew. So transport is the way to go. The most of my comments that I sort of marked down through this is on the issue of the counting. And I think what it says in there is that we should be confident that the figures for the caravans, etc., are correct. Just trying to find where it says that in there. 6. No, it's not. It's in the inclusion of caravans in dwelling stock report. That local authorities will accordingly want to be confident that official dwelling stock figures are as reliable as possible and that caravans and other mobile structures not subject to council tax are not included in dwelling stock figures. And I understand what's being said about it depends what government say, but it is a massive problem with the caravans and everything we've got in the borough that we just need to be confident anyway. We need to know exactly what's happening, who's living where, what council tax we're taking, what can be used in the figures. So I think we should be moving forward with that work, whatever. And I know that what we've got here is just for note in this report, but there's a lot more in there. And I think we should be making recommendations to P&R to move forward with some traffic modelling. And we also make a recommendation that this is the council that could choose to investigate whether the 2,605 vacant caravans and other mobile temporary structures were subject to council tax or not. And I think we need to be recommending to P&R that work also does go ahead. So I'm happy to propose that we include those 2 recommendations and move that forward, because otherwise we are just going to keep going around in circles.
If we just start on the one on the work on the caravans, is everyone in favour of us making that recommendation to, or is it anyone against? Well, hold on. So those in favour.
I'd like to make a comment on it, though. Obviously, we're aware on the Isle of Sheppey that an awful lot of these so-called holiday camps are only paying business rates, so there's no contribution, or virtually no contribution, to the community at all, and that includes Swale. They are an awful lot of people live in them, and they're obviously not supposed to, but nonetheless, that is an existing situation. We've also got a huge number of non-employed on the Isle of Sheppey, a very poor economic base, which hasn't recovered since the closure of the Royal Dockyard 60 years ago. So it's quite serious. And the infrastructure, the transport, on the transport side, which is my specialisation, of course, is appalling, frankly. So I think we can justify the fact that these numbers are unsustainable. I think for the whole of Swale, quite frankly, there's no employment. There's no employment on Sheppey. No real proposals. Even Abbott Laboratories, which was brought in with the closure of the Royal Dockyard, another firm took them over, and of course, needless to say, there's a nice big land bank. So they've decided they would close the factory, and so I'm sorry, but we need to be realistic.
On the point about the making a recommendation for the work to establish the numbers of unoccupied or otherwise caravans, that was what we were coming to at this point. So does anyone else want to say anything about that, or are we happy to vote on the recommendation? Okay. Monique.
Yeah, so I think we have to we recognise, I think everyone across the council, that we have a problem with these caravans that are being lived in permanently when they shouldn't be. And I think to deny that those are, whether they're being rightfully or wrongly used, they are, is a matter of fact that they are, and it is a strain on our services and our infrastructure. And, you know, fine, the council could go kick everyone out. It would be unbelievably expensive, but the queue at the door would be several thousand. But it has to be recognised that they are there. Government has to recognise that that is a matter of fact. Legally or not, then we can't keep building, you know, loads of houses for, and we've equally got an inadequate housing provision that shouldn't be there, but needs to be somehow tackled in the long run, because it does absolutely nothing for our visitor economy. In fact, it acts as a drag. So they're not people coming to spend money in the, you know, the ice cream shop and everything else. They don't have the budget for that. We know how they're being used, and it is not appropriate for our local district.
Councillor Martin.
Just a reminder that if we were to count them in the dwellings, that increases the number of dwellings we have to build. Whereas if we accept that these unoccupied dwellings were not dwellings, they were in fact holiday homes, and people weren't there at the census count because they were staying in their permanent accommodation elsewhere, that reduces our number. So let's remember that as well.
I totally recognise that.
I think what we're asking for is some accuracy about this, and therefore we need to do the work in order to do it. So, which is the recommendation. So, those in favour of the recommendation? I think that's unanimous. Thank you. And then the second point is about the transport modelling. Mike, did you want to say more on this?
Yeah, I totally support it, but I think we need to be clear what we're recommending. So if Councillor Hunt is agreeable, my amendment would be that we traffic model. We consider the traffic modelling that has already been provided and have that brought to this committee, so that we can look at, we can consider that again, and then commission a traffic modelling on each of the 6 proposed options. We will have to populate them with potential sites, which I think we'd have to agree as a working group which sites go in the testing. But I think before we can do that, we need to see what was there before and what was in the previous assumptions, because they were all tested independently. There was I don't think there was any cumulative testing of if you have this one and that one, what the impact would be. So I think the recommendation should be that we commission 6 traffic models for all 6 options, following us populating them.
Monique?
So going back to, so the traffic modelling, there's a couple of things which I wanted to raise earlier, which was about employment and employment land use, because we're talking about we're going to have to identify where the employment sites are. I think one thing that we've been quite clear over time with is that employment land, it is an allocation of employment land, but it's what we wish to see there. And I think we've talked about wording around particular sites and how they're used. But we don't want an allocation of employment sites that ends up being a 1 million square foot shed with just 300 jobs in it, because that is not a good use of our land. So the modelling's got to take account, I think, reasonably, an expectation of the use. I mean, if that's what they think it's going to be used for, then they've got to factor in all the traffic movements that go with that, if it's going to be a 1 million square foot shed. Because that's a different flow of traffic as opposed to an office. And that brings me on to the second thing, which is employment commuting patterns have changed substantially. And the model needs to reflect the reality of how we now live, with many people working a hybrid, working from home. So the commuters that we used to see, all, going disappearing off to London 5 days a week. No, but we there doesn't need to be some realistic assumption about working patterns here. So, and thirdly, was the impact of, was it the GRAPPA that Highways England imposed in Grampian? That's it. I couldn't remember GRAPPA. I was thinking drink, wasn't I? The Grampian conditions and the cumulative impact they had on Sittingbourne as a break in delivering households, which then compounded the problem around 5-year supply and delivery of units, because that really needs to be factored in. Because if in the future they were talking about phasing, as the previous inspector said, you have to phase around developments, then we've got to reflect the situation that we've ended up in now as a result of the Grampian, not GRAPPA condition, and the impact that can have on 5-year supply. I do agree with all the previous speakers around the highways infrastructure and the infrastructure generally and the caravan stuff. I am.
I suppose the Grampian conditions effectively is phasing. It is the same. Yeah. I think just for clarity, I think it would be good to Stuart, if you could make any comments on the transport modelling. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, because it's annoyingly, I had the notes from that meeting on my phone that I deleted last week, and I had all the traffic modelling on there, and how it was done was it was something like a 40, 20, 40 split, and it was a split that was done as a percentage, so it was a high level. But I don't think that report ever came back to any meeting, because things just then sort of didn't go anywhere after that. So I think it does need to have that report come back with those. I don't know if when Stuart does come in, whether you've seen those traffic modelling, or even Joanne knows about it, but they are there somewhere. But what I think we need to do is be recommending to P&R that the work is done, but the detail of that, I think it's going to be needing a report to go to P&R, because it'd be interesting to see what Joanne said, because I think this is going to be a budget issue because of the amount of cost that's going to be involved in doing that. So I personally see it as we're making a recommendation to P&R, but P&R then need a report to know how much that's going to cost and how much budget they can put in, and how that then works of what needs to be done to each scenario.
Councillor Martin.
Councillor Hunt has made one of the points I was going to make there of, have we actually got £300,000 left in the budget to do that?
The modelling's cheaper now. Isn't that right? Do you want to come in, Stuart?
No, let's
Sorry, Chair.
Councillor Martin, finish your points, and then we'll
Certainly, I think, regardless of, we do need to look at the budget implication. We can't go saying that we're going to spend money that isn't budgeted. That's going to need another decision elsewhere. I also think that you're completely correct from Councillor Bonney in terms of the change in patterns of travel. Anyone that uses the M2 on a fairly regular basis will know that you go on a Monday or a Friday into the office, excellent. Half an hour straight away. If you want to do it on a Wednesday or a Thursday, give yourself an hour. It's quite simply that people tend to work from home on Mondays and Fridays, and they will commute the rest of the week. You can see that pattern if you go to any of our train stations. Certainly, regardless of whatever colour government we've got this month, there does have to be a change to more sustainable options of travel and to more sustainable ways of living. We're starting to see some encouraging signs in that general direction. People are starting to be willing to change from oil-fired boilers, for example, to air source heat pumps and whatnot. And some are willing to ditch their second cars where they've got car club schemes nearby. It can happen. We're seeing it as well with those that are utilising community bus services locally and the potential for expansion of some of those as well. So there is some green shoots there, for want of a better phrase. We have to be prepared to make some quite serious changes if we're going to go anywhere near the net zero target for 2050. And we do have to rely to an extent on central government pushing that agenda along as well. But by all means, we do need to see jobs next to housing, as it always used to be. Someone that can walk to work would be a godsend. Let's face it, we saw it in Faversham in the 90s when we lost the Whitbread Brewery. That's an awful lot of staff that suddenly had to travel down to Maidstone daily rather than into the town centre. But as I say, I think it is going to come down to costing, whether or not we can afford to do all of the models or whether we have to prioritise what we can. But beyond that, happy to go with the recommendations.
So just so that we're sort of clear about what we are proposing, it's perhaps I could just ask Councillor Hunt just to sort of clarify that, and then whether you'd like any further clarification on what is being asked and proposed.
I think the main point is that we're saying that traffic modelling work needs to be done first so we can look at how we go forward with it. So as we can't make decisions, I think it just needs to be to P&R that we're recommending that is done, and obviously up to officers how that is taken, because I think it does need to be probably a separate report to P&R. Whether that does come back to us to look at what we think should be done to make a recommendation, but I still think it needs to go to P&R for the budget and everything. So the recommendation that we're making is that traffic modelling work is progressed prior to Reg 18.
But I think what Councillor Baldock was saying was about the extent of it, and I think the other question alongside that is which I have heard raised, is that the modelling itself isn't necessarily enough. You need to know what the mitigation would be as well, and you also need to know the sites. So,
yeah. But then we can't recommend that if we don't know if there's budget or how officers are going to work.
We can make recommendations. The budget's in another committee.
Right. Yeah.
But so. Councillor Speed.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that what we're voting on is traffic modelling on all 6 options, because I think that's very important. Thank you.
Okay. Those in favour of requesting a level of modelling on? No, I think again it depends on. Perhaps there's something for you to come back on as to what sort of modelling there is. There can be very high level modelling, or there can be very detailed modelling, and what we're wanting to be done. But yeah, can I pass this on to Stuart and have your reaction to that?
Okay, so in terms of potential modelling scenarios, we could take 2 approaches. We could look at very high-level area-based growth. So we still would have to say, for example, in a certain part of the borough, we'd be expecting to deliver 2,000 homes, in another part 3,000. But looking at it as an area-based approach rather than site-specific, we could model all 6 scenarios. There would be a cost involved in that. Alternatively, we could take a second approach where we actually do the detailed scenarios, so actually looking at site-specific growth options. So there's 6 that's been considered through the various reports. Already one option is budgeted for as part of the Reg 18 draft plan, transport modelling that we've been working on with Jacobs, but there would still be a cost for the other 5 options. I have spoken with Jacobs informally about this, and they think there may be a case where we might be able to reduce down 1 or 2 of the scenarios. For example, the growth in the east approach and then growth going large in the east approach are very similar, so they feel there might not be the need to run the 2 scenarios, so there could be a little bit of cost saving there. But I don't really want to talk about figures too much at this stage, but to do the additional 5 scenarios would be in the region of about 50,000 for both options. So if you go high level, just looking at growth areas, or if you go site specific. So it's not cheap, but we are using the Kent-wide model. It's been run by Jacobs. So in terms of current commuting trends, it's much newer base date year that they use for the Jacobs. It's from 2019, whereas our previous transport consultant, Swaco, their base model is from 2017. But because it's been developed across Kent, our neighbouring authorities have been using the model, so Medway, Canterbury and Maidstone. So a lot of the data, a lot of the collection counts are all very recent. As part of preparing our transport modelling for the Reg 18, they've also done the gap analysis and done additional counts specific to Swale as well. So in terms of current, most recent trends, that model is as up to date as we can get a model. So hopefully the outputs be realistic. But as I say, if we were to go down either of these two approaches, there would be substantial cost to either approach.
Can I just check, because obviously now Junction 5's been upgraded, and I think technically actually falls outside the borough, doesn't it? But it's such a significant change that would be taken account of.
Yes, I mean the transport modelling looks at the strategic road network, so it looks at all the junction impacts within the borough. Yeah.
It's just the upgrade's now finished. Before that was a major source of gridlock. So,
as I say, the actual gap analysis that our transport consultants carried out was done this summer, so it would take account of all the latest trends, commuting trends.
Sorry, could you just explain a gap analysis?
So as I say, Jacobs have been developing in conjunction with Kent County Council a Kent-wide transport model. So the idea is they'll have a model for the whole of the county. So as part of that, they've been working in conjunction with our neighbouring authorities. So they produced transport modelling for Medway's draft Reg 18 local plan. They did the transport modelling for Maidstone's now adopted local plan and for the emerging plan down in Canterbury. But because it was the first time we were using Jacobs, whereas they'd done recent counts, which some of it kind of bled into our authority, where you have the strategic road network, there were gaps where that their modelling for those other authorities hadn't been carried out, or the counts hadn't been carried out for Swale. So they had to identify where those gaps were, and then actually go out and do the counts. So the latest counts for our transport modelling come from the summer of this year, if that makes sense. And then you got the neighbouring authorities have all had very recent Reg 18 consultations, and Maidstone, which just recently adopted its local plan. So the counts are very much up to date for the modelling.
So I would understand that as saying actually the work is there. A lot of the information is there, and therefore it's a question whether we ask for more than just the one model.
Well, because we were looking at a draft Reg 18 consultation around about now, late autumn time, we had to get the base model ready to go so that once we selected the sites for testing, we could just feed it in. So in terms of the actual base approach, it's all ready and completed. It just requires sites now to be fed into it.
Okay, so with that in mind, those in favour of requesting PNR to approve transport modelling for all 6 options. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Okay. Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I think if you look at paragraph 4.5.9, this is what we need to be doing. That says, by taking the approach of accepting the standard method, but then assembling a robust evidence base that demonstrates why such a figure is not deliverable. I think that's what we need to keep in the back of our mind and at the front of our mind. All these points that we've made, we need to be pursuing them. 4.6.7, there may be an argument around unsustainable commuting patterns resulting from Swale's housing growth and limited job growth. So we should be pursuing that, finding out what the impact is. And yes, it says we can mitigate it by the functional housing and travel to work areas, but we're pretty restricted where we can put, we can put housing, and we haven't got many jobs that we can put the houses near. So, on that level, I think we need to do a bit of work to look at that. 5.3.5. Oh, and I'll make that recommendation that we do that bit of work. But 5.3.5 is the summary of the environment. Now, it says here, identification of sites is challenging. The environmental constraints are recognised as key factors that must be considered in a plan when deciding if objectively housing needs can be met. So, this, the LPRHN and land availability in Swale, blah blah, established settlement suggests there's not a strong argument for planning below the LHN, but this should be tested in greater detail through the sustainability appraisal and the habitat regulation assessment to fully understand the cumulative impacts before proceeding with a basket of sites and strategy. But it's capable of passing the MPPF test of soundness, which is where I think we'll have the problem. So we've done a sustainability appraisal on sites in isolation. We would only do a sustainability appraisal on a full one on when we've actually about to go ready with a Reg 18. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
So at that point, we need to be looking at, is there, again, we need to know, are we going to be putting forward a suite of sites that would actually meet the sustainability appraisal? Are we actually going to be able to, so what sort of stuff are we looking for in a sustainability appraisal and a habitats regulation assessment? How do we know that the sites we're putting together will meet these tests before we put them together? I think it's similar to the transport issue. We need to know whether or not these options, which of them are more or less sustainable, which of them can have mitigation but we think is realistic. Anything can be mitigated, but the cost can be high. I think we just need to have that greater knowledge ahead of going forward. We have talked about Transport 542. I think we've talked enough about transport. 5431 talks about a lower target base. So based on the evidence, there could be a case for setting a housing requirement below LHN on the basis of the transport issues. So, yeah, we talked about a stepped approach. I think that's the wrong approach to take. It's something you can bear in mind, but that's what the last local plan did. And then it failed on the 5-year housing test, even though it was never meant to build out that number at the beginning of the plan. Now, I understand they've made a change in the way this is worked out going forward, but I'd hate for us to be having another step trajectory, meaning that we just fall foul of the 5-year housing supply within a few years of adopting a plan, if we ever do. So, and again, it does require external commitment. Now, we will have to put in, I think we have to do a 5-year review anyway. Every 5 years, a local plan has to be reviewed. I don't think we should be, it's harder to put something in than it is to take it out. I don't think we should be in a position where we are assuming major investment from government until we see it, until we get, real confirmation that it's coming, because otherwise our local plan will be unsound and will fail. So I really think that needs to be done. And there was a couple of bits in the conclusion that I thought were interesting. 6.1.5. A review of the existing available evidence has highlighted several characteristics that present very real challenges to growth and place making in Swale. And then it says on 6.1.6, the cumulative effect to the overall extent to which the borough is constrained. Now, all these things that we test, the transport, the AOMB, it's all done in isolation. But when you're looking at the cumulative impact of the transport limitations, the environment limitations, and then you put in the employment imbalances, you're actually building up a strong argument that cumulatively the impacts mean that the standard method cannot be delivered, and that's where I think we need to be. That's where I think we need to be going. 6.1.9. On the basis of our review, we also conclude that it is reasonable to remain open to lower growth scenarios. Then we go on about the stepped approach again. But this is a notable departure from a position taken in 2021 when lower growth was ruled out as unreasonable. So I think they have in 2 years or 3 years changed their attitude to what is actually deliverable in Swale. That's what we need to be focusing on. That's where we need to be putting our efforts. And I still think that it's better that we put our efforts into testing the case as far as possible against all the different impacts than going through with one option, testing it, finding that doesn't work, and trying another option, because that will take us forever. And there's no guarantee we're going to come out of anything and corrected it. So I would propose that we do those pieces of work as well ahead of any, so that we have an informed Reg 18. And as I say, I don't think we're going anywhere with a Reg 18 until at least July.
Councillor Bonney and then Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you. It talks about environmental constraints. I think we need to draw attention here to the water protection zones and the issues we have around water. So whilst the protected landscape of what was the AONB, and it's renamed now, that is an absolutely vital resource in providing water, not just around where I am, but further along towards the gap between Faversham and Ashford. That water's pumped over to the Isle of Sheppey. Isle of Sheppey doesn't have its own water supply, as I understand. It's actually stored at the back of the... No, doesn't anymore. It's stored at the back of the science park. And what that shows is how critical our groundwater and the water protection zones are. And any damage to them. There was damage to the one, I think, at the back of Lower Housestow, where petrochemicals were bled into the water protection zone. That's non-potable water now, can only be used for industrial purposes in Sittingbourne. That meant major infrastructure changes, as a result, contamination from industry. And that has to be recognised as a risk, as well as the delivery of housing, because you can't build, well, you shouldn't be building housing over your drainage into your water protection areas. The other one is on 5.428, which is around health, and that is the old plan that CCGs had for Swale in terms of upgrading our health facilities. That's out of date. Most of it didn't get delivered. I think it even refers to your councillor, your surgery's extension there, which I think it probably has happened, whereas many of the other things haven't happened. And actually, we're in probably a worse scenario than we were in 2019. So whilst that was the plan, we've had more houses, and none of those projects, or few of them, properly got off the ground, and we've actually had the closure of a surgery in Tenham, which has resulted in it moving to the Memorial. And the other one is, in terms of this cumulative impact, I think it can absolutely be demonstrated, the fact that Homes England have failed to deliver on their own site in Queenborough and Rushenden. The Homes England venture has been a failure. It's caused us a significant problem around our 5-year supply. And if the government's own agency can't make it work, then I think that really underlines the issues. They've spent more than £30 million of taxpayers' money land raising there, and they can't deliver. And we've got all these unbuilt permissions. the cumulative impact across the borough is more than demonstrated in my mind.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Another question for Stuart through the chair. I remember we had a briefing, and I'm sure you said we have more than 5 years land supply. Then we had Ufton Court Farm appeal, and wasn't it something like 4.3? This on 5.6.9 says again 5.13 years. One, my question is, how can each different person perceive it differently? And two, exactly what is, if there's a formula, what is our current position? Thank you.
Thank you. So this study was completed in first draft before the Ufton Court Farm decision was published. So that's why it's referenced in the 5.13 years worth of housing land supply. That position came around due to a change in a drop in the affordability uplift element to our standard method for calculation. So they actually gave us a 5-year supply at that point. The council's position on that was it was made clear in guidance that you use the most latest data for determining your 5-year housing land supply position. The inspector at the Ufton Court Farm case actually took a different approach. So he interpreted policy, well, the overall context of how you would apply the calculation to mean that he felt, which you could say argue it as it wasn't clear in guidance, that the spirit of the approach was to have the latest affordability ratios out in the March time, so that you would then do a comprehensive calculation in April and have a base date going forward from there. And he felt, as part of his inquiry at Ufton Court Farm, that the use of the affordability uplift at the base date of April 2023 wasn't appropriate. So he then went back to the December 5-year supply position that we had published, which was 4.95 years worth. I think what's important to remember, particularly in the last 12 months, there's been quite a lot of change by the previous government and the current one in terms of its approach towards 5-year housing land supply. So the first one was back in December 2023. They removed what was known as the 5% buffer, which was a requirement as a minimum as part of the calculation. So you add on 5% more than what was set out in the standard method. So that was removed back in December. And then, as I say, we had this affordability uplift change. And then since then, we've also had the proposed changes to the NPPF consultation from July, which now intends to put the 5% buffer back on, and also a slightly alternative approach to the standard method, which would see our need go up slightly. So we actually, as of today, have published a comprehensive 5-year housing land supply position at the base date of 1st of April of this year, 2024. So that position now supersedes the Ufton Court Farm. But what's important about the current new supply position that we published is that it has to be mindful of the inspector's findings as part of that inquiry. So as a result, we state now that we can demonstrate 4.2 years worth of housing land supply. I think the biggest takeaways from the Ufton Court Farm decision was that the inspector gave no weight to the existing local plan allocations due to the age of the plan, and that having an outline planning consent that was on an allocated site in itself, even with reserve matters applications submitted, so he took a very strict line. So even with reserve matters submitted but not approved, that in itself he concluded was not enough evidence to demonstrate that delivery could be within the first 5 years for those types of sites. So yeah, that's the position we're at the moment.
So basically, the information here is inaccurate.
It was accurate at the time that the study was drafted.
Just picking up again on Councillor Baldock's point about 5.3.6, it feels a bit like the same arguments about the transport modelling, sort of a chicken and egg approach here, is that they say we should we test it before proceeding to a basket of sites, but I keep on hearing that actually to get a sustainability appraisal, you need the basket of sites. And so where do we get into that circle?
So the standard practice would be to run a sustainability and habitats regulation assessment alongside the draft plan regulation 18 consultation. So if we were just to do an issues and options reg 18, we wouldn't be able to do that, but because we're doing a draft plan, we would have to test. We have the opportunity there to test the sites against the sustainability, the SA and the HRA. So what it will do is it will look at the council's preferred growth approach. It will look at the sites that are proposed for allocation within the draft plan, but it'll also look at reasonable alternatives. So it'll look at the other 5 growth options, and it'll also look at all sites that are identified through the council's HELA as potentially suitable and suitable. So even though plan making is where we determine what sites we want to go in the plan, the sustainability and the HRA will look at all the reasonable alternative growth options and all the other sites that have been discounted and not put into the plan for allocation.
So it always looks at everything, whatever we've chosen.
Yeah, and also all the sites, not just the ones that go into the plan, will be tested through the SA and the HRA. So it'll look at a wide range of criteria. I don't have them all off the top of my head. So on some of the criteria, the sites may score poorly. On others, they might score well. You get an overall assessment per site, and then what the SA and the HRA will do is look at the policies that are proposed within the draft plan and whether or not they are sufficient enough to mitigate any of the issues that are identified through the 2 studies, and if not, then the SA and the HRA will make recommendations of which to either change the policy or what levels of kind of mitigation are required. So that's how they kind of narrow down which sites are the most sustainable and the habitat's impacts.
And because Councillor MacDonald there, then Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. With regard to the potable water, I think that's a very important issue. I know it is for the whole of the southeast, but despite the rainfall which we've had this year, the water table under the chalk has been reducing for a long time. And in fact, in some areas outside Canterbury, the water table has gone right down to, I know in my sister's property there was a well that was 300 feet deep and it actually dried out. So with all this housing and increased consumption of water, that really is, it's unsustainable, quite frankly. And is apart from the water thing, the transport, you've only got to look at the Sittingbourne, quite frankly. Most of the time, there's huge congestion.
Councillor Baldock.
Again, why are we doing this at the same time as the Reg 18? Surely we need to do this to inform what our Reg 18 will be. So that we don't put a Reg 18 that dies on its feet. Why can't we do this first? Why can't we do these tests and do these reports and do these everything before the Reg 18 so that we're not in Groundhog Day?
I mean, we could do the test now and then pause to see if the mitigation, the policy amendments are there. But the key point is we need to have a preferred growth approach or reasonable alternative growth approaches and selection of preferred sites and all the other sites within the HELA to feed into that process. So we need to complete that work before we can run those tests.
So if I come out, I think our recommendation would be that we do work on the unsustainable commuting patterns, but we do work on the environmental constraints to build robust evidence, and that given the delays caused by the Secretary of State, we progress work on what Stuart's just said with a view to being able to do a sustainability appraisal and habitat regulation, I can't remember what it's called now, HRA, as soon as possible next year, without having to actually wait before Reg 18. I think we need to do this potentially before we get the appeal, so that we're in a position after the appeal not to be too far behind, if that appeal takes 12 or 18 months.
To do that, do we need the sites chosen?
Yeah, we need to...
In detail?
Yeah, we need to have agreed all... So we're running a call for sites at the moment, it's closing tomorrow, so we need to run those new sites through the assessment. We need to agree the HELA, we need to agree the potential sites, Effectively, we have to put together a draft plans which has all the development management policies in it, has all the strategic and site allocation policies, so we can then run those tests. So we effectively have to do everything in terms of drafting the plan and having our reasonable alternatives ready, so we can then run them through those tests.
So the onus on us, as soon as those that call for sites is concluded and analysed, is to then choose sites for all of the options. Would that be the next thing to do if we're going to progress down this sort of route?
Yeah, so we've brought the HELA informally to the working group. So yes, that would be the approach then, to bring a revised HELA with the new call for sites in it, and then again discuss potentially suitable and suitable sites with the group against the preferred growth option and then the alternatives as well.
But potentially all of the alternatives if we're going to
Yes.
take the approach that Councillor Baldock's suggesting. That sounds quite a piece of work. We've got it down to 6, but even so, that's 5 more than we were thinking of.
Do I have a seconder for my proposal? We recommend reports on unsustainable commuting patterns and environmental constraints is put to P&R.
Okay, anyone speaking to that further? No? Okay, those in favour? I'm going to abstain on this one.
Can I ask what Stuart thinks is a reasonable... Actually, this is a bit unfair, but I'm going to ask anyway. When could we reasonably likely to hear what the decision on Highstead is?
Yeah, I think that's probably really a question for one of my DM colleagues, and we don't have any here tonight. I don't know if Joanne's got anything she can add.
I can chip in with the best information which we have, is that the start date was last Thursday when we were notified of the Secretary of State call-in, with the expectation that a planning inquiry would be scheduled within 22 weeks, which takes us around to kind of mid-April time. Of course, it's 2 inquiries because Highstead is 2 applications. We had informal advice from Council that the expectation would be each inquiry would be a minimum of 10 days. So you're potentially looking at 6 weeks. Then we get into the territory where how long is it for the planning inspector to write up his or her decision? Then it goes to the Secretary of State for her to review the planning inspector's decision. So that bit gets a bit foggy. But the bit that we do know is the up to 22 weeks for the date to be set, and then the expectation that it would be 20 working days plus across them both. Depends how quickly the inspector's report is turned around. Yep, thank you.
And I understand that if the new NPPF comes in after Christmas, is that right? Because if it does, the applications will be judged against that, and then the inspector might then adjourn so they can familiarise themselves, and that could end up in more delay.
Excuse me. So I don't think the government's changed its intention to publish, but my understanding is it's going to be in December time, so it could be in about 4 weeks. I think really it will be dependent on if they deviate from the proposed changes. If there's not much deviation, then the inspector should be well aware of what's coming. At the moment, there's kind of no intelligence out there whether or not there'll be any changes to those that were proposed. So that's all I can say on that at the moment.
Councillor Martin.
To be the bearer of bad news, the average time taken for a decision called in by the Secretary of State is 65 weeks.
Well, I suppose given the amount of extra work we've just given ourselves to do for this plan, maybe this is... Well, we're doing 6 instead of 1, but can't...
Thank you. So just a few questions around process. We've got some reports that were recommended from the last meeting of this working group going through to P&R at the end of the month. So we have the local development scheme that we proposed previously going forward. I presume the group now would like to recommend to P&R that that local development scheme isn't progressed pending their consideration of the traffic modelling, because it would seem a bit anomalous to ask P&R to agree that we do extra work, but at the same time have the local development scheme which didn't reflect that work.
I think we've got to go into a pause until Heisted, like we had to before. The current LDS, I think, has us going out for Reg 18 in March or April.
April to June, sorry.
I'm not sure. Is there an absolute? No. If we've got till June, then I think pausing does seem to be used against us sometimes. Councillor Hunt.
Can I not just recommend to P&R that we give up?
Councillor Hunt.
Coming while they're discussing it, I think we have asked for a lot of stuff, and there's no way that it could be put into the LDS that's been agreed. So it has to be changed.
I think that's the conclusion that's just been come to on my right. That the LDS will be amended to reflect the work that we've asked for if P&R accept that we should go ahead with this.
Yes, okay.
Okay, we'll propose that to accommodate this work, we recommend that the LDS be amended. I'll propose that from the chair.
How many months would you like extra?
Yeah.
Chair, I would say that given the appeal and the extra work we're asking, we can ask. We'll recommend to P&R that they, shall we say, put a delay Reg 18 until October.
I wouldn't. Which year? It's not a good idea.
No? Well, we can't have it in May.
Councillor Hunt.
I think it's difficult to say that we do a Reg 18 at a certain date, because surely that's what needs to be put into the LDS. So I think the LDS obviously needs to be looked at to come up with the work that we've asked to go forward. How much is that going to delay things? And then that's then fed back to us with a new LDS that we can then recommend. So when I said about officers come up with, it's how long do officers need to do that work for then to bring it back so we can agree.
So to advise us as to what
What's
I think that
needed.
sounds a sensible proposal.
Okay, so is it fair to say that we will discuss that as officers and then agree with you as chair the LDS that is recommended to P&R, because it's quite tight if we're going to go to P&R on the 27th?
We can't really do that. I just don't think that we just ask them to wait until the December P&R or the next P&R to agree with the new LDS.
We're not sure whether that'll be possible to get that. Ask for permission for it to be delegated to accommodate the work.
I don't know how we do that because we can't delegate. PNR can. We can ask PNR to delegate to come up with a new LDS, but we can't, and we won't. And they can only do that at PNR. I just think we pulled a paper and get one in for December's PNR or January's PNR.
Can I suggest that maybe the officers take this away and talk to various people behind the scenes and work up a plan of how it can be done?
It could just be a paper without recommendation from us.
We could recommend that the LDS is considered in the light of is reconsidered in the light of the recommendations that we've already passed.
Yeah,
I'll continue seconding that. Slight fudge, but it works. Because essentially you could then, the officers can then put in the tabled amendment or tabled suggestion that this is going to take this long. That's what we need. Make sure you're including your holiday time in for your plan. I hope you put all your 2025 holiday already.
Does that work, Jan? Yes. Yeah. As the transport modelling and the other work Joe is just saying that at the end of that report will be the suggestion that PNR consider amending the LDS to account for these reports these recommendations should they be agreed. Right.
Do we also want to reconsider? We've got the preferred options paper that went from PNR. These due to go to full council. Do we want to ask PNR to amend their recommendation there? Because the paper is going to full council, recommending growth option 6.
Well, if we're looking at all options for as an evidence collection, in order to further consider the...
We still have a PNR policy of a PTPWG and a PNR favoured option. Don't know where, if you want to hold off, but you can't just change your view of that. In fact, it wasn't done earlier this month is a problem, but I don't know if you can just remove that. It's on the agenda. Has the agenda been published?
for full council
Yeah.
or for the...
Oh, for full council, yeah. Yes, that won't have been published. But there is an expectation this is going, because I was getting loads of grief from Ben's end of the...
I think we can let that go to council and see what happens with these recommendations. I think this would be my feeling, because we're not really in a position to tell PNR to think again, are we?
No. So, I do think there is a point in that we are gathering further evidence on a range of options. Therefore, is it right to ask the full council to vote a preferred option when we have more evidence?
Okay. Well, I think in that case we could. Well, we've just added a recommendation on the tail end of our extra evidence requests to reconsider the LDS. We could ask them that in the light of this, would they want to reconsider the options or delay the option selection? Councillor Speed.
Exactly. I think given that we're looking for all this extra evidence on all the options, we cannot possibly have a preferred option at this stage.
So we should make that recommendation to PNR as well, because we're recommending something else, that we should actually also recommend that...
Does that matter things up, Stuart, from your perspective?
It's before us. We'll still have to do this process of having the preferred option to take forward into the plan that we'll consult on. So we'll still have to make the decision at some point. But as you say, maybe worth waiting if we're agreed to do all this extra transport modelling and so forth.
In that case, we ought to probably training as well.
Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, I think the key thing is why we're doing this. I think we should, in the recommendations that we're making, just to say that why we're doing this, because of Feisty Park is all up in the air and other things that are going on. It's the reason why we're making a decision. We're not just doing it because we feel like it. We've been put in a position where we need to make some changes, and I think we just need to be clear of that.
And I think we've considered the report tonight as well. And it's arisen out of this report about the exceptional circumstances, and we've considered the points made in this. And as a result of that, we've recommended extra transport modelling to look at all options. And in those circumstances, a preferred option at this point may not be the most appropriate way forward. So we're going to recommend to PNR that alongside the LDS, consider amending that, consider delaying a decision on a preferred option. Everyone happy with that as a proposal? Councillor Martin.
At this point, they've made a decision on a preferred option, have they not, at PNR? So, or are we asking them to rename
reconsider
that decision? Yeah, that's fine then.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Could we not say that, we've indicated our preferred option, but until we've done the traffic modelling, we don't know whether that's what we will stick with or whether something else would be more appropriate, or we're going to be pressing for lower numbers, because there's so much up in the air. So that doesn't undo what we've already decided and what PNR has decided. It's just because of new information, we've got to make sure we get it right.
I think we're slightly in danger of overcomplicating it at this point, but Councillor Bullock.
Yeah, I don't think we could possibly ask full council to state a preferred option when there's so much in the air. The whole thing might change if Feisty gets permission. In fact, all our options will be largely...
Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I do also think that if you were to take a preferred option forward to full council without now that we've asked for that additional evidence, there is of course the risk that that preferred option does not pass full council, thereby. Okay, probably for some of us, probably their preference, but it would of course then mean that extra work on that option would have to cease, and you'd only have the other 5.
But well, I think the request is for transport modelling and extra work on all options, and that includes option 6. But though, from what you say, that may be option 3 and option 6 may be similar transport modelling. But Councillor Hunt.
Sorry, just one other consideration, because if we do go forward to full council and start going further down the line, is there also risks of JRs as well? Because we could be making decisions and developers moving forward with things, and then changing mind, and there could be a few challenges coming up if we do that. So another reason why we shouldn't go too far down the decision making with it.
I think that's a good point. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's been a good debate out of the report.
So just to check on the other papers that are going forward, please. So we've got the housing targets paper going to P&R, which was deferred pending consideration of the exceptional circumstances report. Presumably, we still want P&R to agree the housing target, so we know how we're allocating things amongst the different options. And the second question is, we've got the employment land review report scheduled at full council on December. Is this group happy that that still goes, because that sits outside of... Yeah, thank you.
I mean, I think the housing targets has been covered in the housing. The housing need. Is that what we're saying? Is the one that's going to full council? Yeah. So the housing need has been covered by this. And I don't think there's been much debate about that, because it other than the caravan element of it is I think technical. Yeah, but it's need requirement. Yeah, government imposed need. I just have to always qualify it by that. But yeah. So yeah, I can't see a problem with that, because that, to some extent has been considered by this report as well. Okay, right. I think we'll end the meeting there. Thank you very much.
Do we not have to vote and say that we've accepted it all and noted?
Oh, have we? Oh, sorry. Yeah, let's not know in the meeting. Yeah. Okay. So we've those in favour of proposing to P&R to amend the LDS and consider delaying the decision on the preferred option going to full council. Those and this report. Yeah. Yeah, I think that was unanimous.
I'm happy to propose that we note everything and we're done.
Yeah, we note the report.